Okay, we've been looking at Exodus because we looked at Genesis and then Exodus, and I write these. I'm an old school teacher, and school teachers do certain things, and when school teachers work on a lesson, before they do a lesson, they
read.
Well, they do reading, right? But they write a lesson plan, right? And I learned how to do a lesson plan back when I was working on a project at Old Dominion. That's not relevant, but I know they showed me how to do it for a lot of reasons, and it always has purpose and goals and objectives. And on my little notes, that's what I always have. Because that's what I write for everything I do when I do a class. I've got a lesson plan. I also give a title for every session. And the title for what we're looking at today is 4 letters.
Man.
Oops.
Nope. Oops. That's the title. It's oops. Because that's kind of what we're going to be looking at, is an oops. Before though we talk, give me in just briefly, where are we in Exodus? I mean, we finished Genesis. Where are we in Exodus?
Well, we already went through the Red Sea.
Okay, we've gone through the Red Sea. And we're not going to go through it again,
no.
Right?
Yeah. And they're out in the desert.
They're out in the desert.
And the Lord's providing them food and manna.
Providing them food, and what kind of food? Manna. And quail.
And quail. Yeah.
That's right. And he's providing them water. Right. And the people are very gracious and patient in waiting for the stuff to come. Right.
No, I don't think so.
No. They are people on steroids,
Yeah.
so they're really mean and impatient. I'm not sure they feel young, but they're kind of easily irritated. They're in the wilderness, so they're wandering now. We're out of Egypt, so we won't be going back. But the people keep on talking about. Going back. Why have you done this? You've led us out into the desert. Why didn't you let us stay in Egypt? Because in Egypt they had
food and water.
And in particular, in Egypt they had leeks.
Oh.
They had as many leeks as you could eat. So everyone knows if you've got leeks, you got a party
You better pack
going
up.
on. That's right. So they're in the wilderness now, and we're going to see it today. In fact, this is kind of a theme we see in Exodus and certainly Leviticus, but there's no narrative in Leviticus and Numbers. What is the base? The idea of covenant keeps on coming back. You know, these are God's people. And they aren't called Hebrews like they were in Egypt, because that was a social class. They're called Israelites because they're the children of Israel. In the covenant that they have, on God's side, he's going to lead them. It's the same thing, covenant we saw before. He's going to make them a great nation, going to give them land, the land of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. That's where they're going to be. What seems to be really important on their side of the covenant? In other words, God is going to do this, and what is he looking for from them?
Obey.
Okay, good. It isn't, remember when we looked at Abraham in Genesis, you had these 2 strains, and one of them was faithfulness. I want you to be faithful. And the other strain was, I want you to obey me. And the obedience is what we see in Exodus. We really don't have, this faithfulness, because the people are not faithful. I mean, they really aren't faithful. They're constantly complaining. And God will intervene as they complain, but he's not quite as open when they disobey. When he tells them to do something and they don't do it, we're going to see today that he isn't quite as forgiving, lenient, maybe better. Yeah, when obedience is a big deal in Exodus. Okay, so we're going to be we're going to be looking at 3 little passages, and it's going to be fairly obvious why we do that as we look at it, because we're following the narrative in Exodus, not everything. So we're right at the beginning of 19. Now, we've had all this stuff about manna and water and all kinds of jazz as they're in the wilderness. In chapter 19, verse 1, what's the situation? How does the author identify the situation right at the beginning of chapter 19?
They camped in the desert in front of the mountain.
Okay, they're in the desert, and there's a lot of detail, right, at the beginning.
Yes.
What's some of the details? So they're in the desert, they're camping out. What else? What other details do we have? Where is the desert?
Sinai.
Okay, they're in Sinai. And what else is going on? Where in Sinai are they?
In front of the mountain.
They're in front of a mountain. Okay, so all of this is important, right? Now, in ancient society, ancient world, even we see it in the New Testament, mountains are a big deal. Mountains are a big deal. Why are mountains always a big deal for ancient people? I mean, it doesn't matter if you're Christian or Jew. I mean, pagans, they're important.
Closer to heaven.
They're closer to heaven. They're closer to God. Mountains are, in fact, that's why ancient people would build mountains. In like Babylon, that's what a ziggurat is. They build, or even in Central America, they are building mountains, constructing them so they can be closer to God. And when they did sacrifices, often they did it on the top of that, because you're closer to God. So mountains are always a big deal for ancient people. All right, so they're by a mountain must be important because the writer is going into a lot of detail. Okay, so whatever we're starting here must be relatively important. And so there they are. What does God say to Moses?
He told him this is what he was to say to the house of... this is what he's to say to the house of Jacob.
Okay. And that's what he's supposed to say to the house of Jacob, the Israelites. Okay? And what should he remind them?
That you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings.
Okay, so remind them what happened with Egypt. Now remember, this story is being conveyed to people way later. Who already know the basics. I mean, they're Jewish people. This is being conveyed to people later. Now, what is the author? Why would the author be doing this as he's telling this story to people who are, living much, much later? What is the purpose of doing this? Why do you think the author would be doing this right at the beginning?
They're lacking guidance.
Okay.
They need guidance.
Yeah, they needed some grounding. And so the people who are hearing the story, they're hearing, being reminded that, this getting out of Egypt is a sign of God's care. I mean, the people in the story, it just happened to them, right? We're only talking about 3 months. So it just happened to them. It becomes a big deal for people who may be thousands of years later. It just becomes a little reminder. And what is the promise that he's making as the Lord tells Moses to speak to the people? What does God promise them?
That out of all the nations they'd be a treasured possession.
He's called them out to be special. Now, what does he want from them?
Obedience.
He wants obedience. He wants them to. So you got Israel's going to be special, but he wants obedience. What does Moses do?
He went back and summoned the elders of the people.
Okay, and how do the people respond? And he tells them this. How do the people respond? Well, we will do everything that the Lord has told us. Again, the covenant made here in the wilderness is grounded on obedience. It's not grounded on faith. And that's not a shocker, because what are they going to receive in the wilderness? They're going to receive the 10 Commandments and a whole bunch of law. Because what the Jews are going to say is their entire law was received by Moses in the wilderness. All these details. So the law is going to be the foundation of this people that'll move into the land. So of course, God wants obedience. He's giving the law to be obeyed. So it's not a matter of you need to have faith in God. This is a legal situation for Moses and the people. Okay, so the people agree. So we've got this covenant made. What does the Lord say to Moses?
That the people need to go and consecrate.
Okay.
Consecrate them today and tomorrow and have them wash their clothes and be ready.
Okay.
So
Why do they need to get clean?
because isn't that when the commandments are given?
Okay, well, they need, okay, what is about to happen? They're going to get the commandments. What physically is going to happen that would cause them to the Lord to say, Moses, you got to tell the people, they have to consecrate themselves, so they have to do the laundry and some other things.
So
They have to be clean, and they're not supposed to touch the mountain. What does the Lord say He's going to do?
Come down.
Okay, He's going to come down, and that's because He's going to come down how?
In a cloud.
He's going to come down in a cloud. Now again, this is something just to file away. Clouds are really important. Mountains are important because ancient people saw mountains as closer to heaven. So big things happen on mountains. Even the New Testament, when we talk about Matthew, Jesus in Matthew does his great miracles and teaches. His great teachings in Matthew are
It's her.
on mountains. They're on mountains. That's why he gives a Sermon on the Mount. Yeah. You're trying to distract her. Follow somebody else. That's what you're doing. Yeah.
She heard me crumple paper.
Well, she knows where the Nikos make that. But mountains are a big deal. Clouds are a big deal. Because the Hebrew word for cloud is also the Hebrew word for glory, kavod. That's the Hebrew word that can be translated cloud or glory depending on context. So when they use the word cloud, it's referring to the glory of God. So when God comes down, He comes down in clouds. In the New Testament, that's why on the Transfiguration, which occurs where? On a mountaintop. It says a cloud comes and surrounds them. Well, we think of that as, well, that's hard to see. Cloud is kind of hard to see. No, well, in the ancient world, or to the Jews, cloud was synonymous with glory. In Ezekiel, when the Babylonians take the temple, destroy the temple, are about to destroy the temple, Ezekiel's someplace else, and he has a vision. And one of the things he sees is a cloud leaving the temple, a cloud coming from the temple.
It's okay.
That was the glory of God leaving the temple, because the Babylonians are not going to destroy the place where God lives. God leaves it, and now the Babylonians can destroy it because God's no longer there. That's why they were led by a pillar of cloud as they're going through the wilderness. All of that's referring to the glory of God, not just a physical cloud. It has so much more meaning than that. Okay, so the cloud's going to come, which will suggest that God's presence is going to be there, right? And so Moses hears this, comes down. They're going to need to straighten up. The people consecrate, can't touch the mountain. What is God doing here? He said the covenant. He just said the covenant is based on obedience. What is the Lord doing right here?
Testing them.
He's given them things to do. He's giving them the opportunity to obey. Right? Because He's giving them all these instructions. Okay, what happens on the mountain? Third day, good number.
There was thunder and lightning.
Okay,
and
thunder
cloud.
and lightning and a thick cloud. Understand too, thunder and lightning, that's kind of a big deal. We see it as something spectacular. This thunder and lightning. Well, it's important to note that agricultural people, and this is going to be, the Jews here are not agricultural, they're herders. But this is written to people who are living in the land. And people living in the land are not shepherds in settled society, they are farmers. They're farmers. That's what they do. Well, when you're a herder, you worship gods that lead. You worship gods that will lead you and your flock to
Rich pastures.
That's right. Still waters, green pastures. That's what you want. When you settle in the land and you're a farmer, you don't want gods that are leading you around. Because if you got a farm, you don't want a God that's going to lead you to another farm or going to lead you to more water. You don't want that guy. You want a God that does what?
Helps you with your.
Helps you where you're living. Therefore, you want the soil to be fertile, right? Mm-hmm. You also want a God that's got some power over the weather. You know, you want a God that's going to give you rain when you need it, and isn't going to wipe out your crop with hail. You know, so you want to have it in with gods that, or you want it in with gods that control the weather, and that's thunder and lightning. You know, storm gods. You've heard the god Baal or Baal, and that's what it is in Hebrew. I mean, that was a storm god. That was a god of storms. And you wanted to make sure you were on the right side of him because he could wipe out your crop in a heartbeat. You know, so you don't want to tick him off. So the idea of thunder and lightning, we think it is spectacular, but for an ancient people, that's a big deal. You know, this is a God that's controlling the weather. So all of these ideas of God become incorporated in the one the Jews end up worshiping as Lord. You know, so it's, instead of breaking it, divvying it up into other gods, it's all sort of being incorporated into this one, which is what we see in the Old Testament as they bring these different deities, they bring them together into the one God. All right, so we've got on the mountain, we've got surrounded by smoke. How does God, what do they see happening on this mountain? So we got smoke, thunder, and lightning. We got fire, you know, coming down, which is with powerful image. If you read some things, they'll talk about, well, they're describing a volcano. No, they're not. They're not doing that. They're describing something that
because
is.
Mountain tremble.
Yeah,
right?
this is a miraculous thing. You know, so it's not don't reduce this to a physical story, that somehow this was a volcano erupting. That's not it. He is conveying the power and the authority of God who comes down. And what warning does the Lord give to Moses? As all of this is happening, what warning does the Lord give to Moses? That Moses
go down
is
and warn the people.
Okay, warn the people. Warn the people of what? Don't come up. Don't touch the mountain. Don't come up here. Which is saying what about the mountain? Because the Lord is on it.
Sacred.
It is sacred now. This is sacred ground. You know, so they are not to touch it. But who is to go on the mountain?
Moses.
Moses is and Aaron is. So we've got these two. Now that becomes really important that Aaron's going with him. Why would that become important later, particularly to the people who are reading this? That Aaron is also there with Moses.
Because Aaron is the one who spoke for Moses.
Okay, Aaron is the one that's going to speak for Moses. Why is Aaron going to be important 1,000 years later? Why is Aaron still going to be important 1,000 years later?
Because he helped.
What's that? Priesthood. Aaron is going to be the basis of the priesthood. And right here, so, you know, like I said, imagine a father talking to his son. Dad, why are priests descendants of Aaron? Well, son, let me tell you. There was a guy named, where are they Aaronite? Well, there's a guy named Aaron, you know, brother of Moses. And Aaron was one of the ones that stood between God and the people, conveyed that message to the people. And that's what priests do. Okay, so they're on the mountain, Aaron and Moses, and what happens as we get to chapter 20? What happens on the mountain?
That's when he gives the 10 Commandments.
Boom, gives the 10 Commandments, right? And the commandments, and they're different, slightly different. If you look at how the Jews view the commandments, certainly how our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters view the commandments.
I didn't know they were different.
It's slightly different.
Slightly
different than Protestant. So it's just how you read, you know, how you're reading the Hebrew. But you got I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of Israel, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or under the earth, You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Starts with no other God before, don't make idols, right? And we'll talk more about idols later. What's this business about misusing the name of the Lord? Because when I was a kid, misusing the name of the Lord, when my mother said, don't use the Lord's name in vain, what was she talking about? Cussing. That's what, God doesn't want, it has nothing to do with cussing. It has nothing to do. What does it have to do with misusing the name of the Lord?
Not obeying him.
Well, it certainly has to do with obedience. How might I misuse the name of the Lord? It does have to, it is connected, but a little more specific than that. What would be misusing the name of the Lord?
Like saying God finds something or other. It's like swearing.
If I, it's even more dangerous than that.
No.
If I claim God's authority or wisdom, if I claim it, I am misusing the name of the Lord. Which means we got to be kind of careful with that, because if I say to you, God told me to.
Yeah, you're misrepresenting God.
I am doing what? Speaking for God. God told me. God wouldn't like that. I'm claiming God's authority for myself. That's really dangerous here. Because, and what's the danger if I do that? When people do that, say, God told me, or God says, or God wants, or what's the danger in doing that? Why is that a dangerous thing?
Putting yourself in God's.
Yeah, I'm putting myself in God's place. And why is that dangerous?
Because you're not God.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Shelley. I'm not God. Yeah, because if I were, you'd watch out. I'd be a pretty bad God. I'm not God, and all of a sudden, I've sort of taken myself out of any evaluation of my behavior, because I am now my own judge, right? Remember we talked when we looked at Romans. Paul says the great human sin, the core of all human sin is. You remember that? First chapter of Romans. You remember what Paul says was the core of all human sin?
Taking the Lord's name in vain?
Wasn't taking but close. It's in that neighborhood. Remember what he said the core of human sin was? And every human being is guilty of it. Pagans are guilty of it. Christians are guilty of it. Jews are guilty of it. Core of human sin.
Judging?
Well, yeah, but there's something, judging is here, there's something that leads us to do that. There's something that stands before it, and that's the core. You're right, judging is one of the signs of it, but there's something that leads to that. Idolatry. Worshipping the creature rather than the creator. Worshipping yourself rather than God. You become God because you're speaking for God, right? That's what Paul says causes everything else that's bad, is when we start believing that we know or we can speak for God. Got to be real careful. But anyway, that's one of the commandments that he gives right at the beginning. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, kind of in part of creation. Honor your father and mother. Your days will be long in the land. Now we're starting to build not just relationship with God, but sort of a society. Relationships within society, and the rest of them have everything to do with society. Like don't murder. Man, it's hard to build a society if you're running around killing one another. Don't commit adultery. Hard to create a society if nobody trusts anybody else. Don't steal. Duh. Don't bear false witness. Yeah, you probably shouldn't be lying. You know, it's hard to build any kind of a society if people running around lying, not telling the truth. Don't covet your neighbor's house or anything of your neighbor. Don't do it. You know, don't covet, because it's hard to function as a society if you're doing these things. Okay, so these are 10. Now, having these 10, that's great. And I know we're going to put them in class. Texas is putting them in every classroom. And that's fine. I don't care whether they put them in the classroom. But if I look at thou shalt not kill, but let me think of the exceptions of times when you can kill. Because a soldier in combat,
Yeah.
I mean, duh. I mean, he's going to be shooting. So does that mean he's violating the commandments?
No.
Well, no. Why is he not violating the commandments? I don't know. Because it sure looks like he is here. So I'm going to have to make exceptions, you know, within it, you know. So these are become very broad principles. And what the Jews are going to do is what? What are they going to do with these?
They're going to use them against God.
Well, ultimately they're going to use them against God. They're going to have to break them down, right? Well, what does it mean? You know, what does it mean, thou shalt not kill? Well, are there times when you have to? Well, if you look at the law, yeah, there are times when you have to. That may be something you're going to do. You're going to have to start breaking these down to explain it. So they're hard to follow as is. So you have to kind of break them down a little bit. Okay, but these are the principles that, and the Jews believe they're getting these principles from where?
God.
From God. You know, these aren't just good ideas, although if you go in the ancient world, I don't think you'd find a civilization in the ancient world that says, oh, in our civilizations it's okay to murder one another. You know, in Babylon, oh, if you're in Babylon, you can kill anybody you want. That's not, why wouldn't you have that in a civilization? Why wouldn't you have that in Babylon? Why wouldn't you have that in Egypt?
Because there's no order.
Because there's no order, you're not going to exist very long.
Yeah.
If you're running around killing and stealing and lying, you're not going to exist as a society long. So all the ancient people followed these general principles. This isn't rocket science. The Jews are saying these principles are coming from where? Are coming from God. Therefore they have divine sanction. And what God wants us to do is what?
Obey him.
That's right. The whole covenant is grounded in obedience. You know, so that's really being stressed here. And understand, this is going to kick off a whole bunch of stuff we're not going to look at in detail. Now, the people get these, right? How do they witness the thunder and all this kind of stuff? How do they respond?
They trembled in fear.
Okay, they tremble in fear. Why are they trembling in fear?
I don't know, but he told them not to be afraid.
Okay, don't be afraid. They're afraid God's going to speak to them, right? Directly.
Oh,
and if
okay.
God speaks to them, that's a bad deal, right? And Moses says
Or they'll die.
That's right. They're afraid they're going to die. Moses says, "Don't be afraid." God is doing what? It's testing you because obedience is the big deal, right? Now, what instructions does the Lord give Moses?
Tell the Israelites this, that you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven.
Okay. Spoken, and Israelites have seen this, right? Mm-hmm. And so then God's going to give them a command. Now, he gave these 10 commandments, again, worked into this story. He's going to give them a command, right? Pretty clear command, right? Mm-hmm. Not a vague thing about don't covet or don't lie. You know, it's very clear. What are they not supposed to do? Don't make gods out of silver or gold. Don't make gods. Now, I gave you some broad ideas. This is specifically, don't make idols out of gold or silver. All right? Now, Why is that going to be important that he specifies this? Why would it be important that he?
So that they know what they're, when he tells them that they have to obey
exactly
it.
what they do.
Yeah, I was looking at it, because Judy, you knew, because you were, this is exactly what they're going to do. In just a little bit. They're going to make a god,
Yeah.
an idol out of gold. So, which means when they do that, they have
Disobey God.
disobeyed God, which means the covenant is
Broken.
The covenant is broken. Okay, so what does the Lord say they should make?
A sacrifice.
They should perform a sacrifice. And to do a sacrifice, you need what? What do you gotta have to perform a sacrifice? You gotta have an altar to perform a sacrifice. Now that's something else, just to file away. You know, that's why in a Roman Catholic church, that's why they have altars. Why do they have an altar in a Roman Catholic church? The only reason you need an altar, is to perform a sacrifice. That's all altars do. That's all they do. Why do you have to have an altar in a Roman Catholic church? But not a Presbyterian church. Every time the Mass is celebrated, Jesus Christ is sacrificed on the altar. The bread is the body broken. The wine is the blood shed. There's a sacrifice performed every single time. That's why you need an altar. That's why you need a priest. Because priests perform sacrifices. In the Lutheran Church, you have a sacrifice being performed, but it's a little different. You know, in the Episcopal Church, same thing. Even in the Methodist Church, you know, you have a sort of a spiritual sacrifice being performed. Presbyterians, we don't perform, when we share communion, we don't believe a new sacrifice is taking place. Therefore, in Presbyterian churches, you don't have altars. Although a lot of Presbyterian churches will call the table thing in the front an altar. And they'll have altar calls in some churches when there's no need for an altar. So, I mean, if you want to do it, call it that. You call it anything you want. It doesn't really matter. But an altar is for sacrifices. That's why you need it. Even some Christian churches, you need it because the sacrifice is being performed whenever the priest does his thing. In Presbyterian church, I'm not a priest. I'm just not. And therefore, I don't do sacrifices. I haven't sacrificed in years.
Thank you.
So we don't. Therefore, there's no altars. We don't have altars. So, but you would in Roman Catholic Church. So there's a reason behind that. He says, build an altar because they're going to what are they going to do on the altar?
Exactly.
They're going to cut up some animals, right? And burn them up to the Lord, and that's what you do on an altar. You sacrifice animals. Blood is shed on altars. Okay? All right. So that's done, part of Jewish worship, core of Jewish worship, as long as the temple exists. That's what they'll do. When the temple is destroyed, we got a whole new thing going on in Judaism. No more sacrifices. Now you've got 22 and 23 that we're going to zap through. What's going on? Just look, if you got a Bible with headings, what are some of the headings in 22 and 23? What's that?
Idols and altars.
Idols and what's going on with the idols and altars? Just in a nutshell. These are rules, right? We got a bunch of rules going on, right? In 22. What about 23?
You cannot make any gods to be heaven.
Okay, what they're doing is doing what? They're breaking down these 10 principles that were given. They're creating law. Only they're saying the law is coming from where?
God.
It's coming from God. This law is coming from God. It's not being created by a smart person or by a Congress or by a king. This law is coming from
God.
God. This is from God's mouth to Moses' ear. Now, beginning in 24, so we got all this law that's sort of being put within this narrative story, right? Because in chapter 24, we go back to the narrative, right? We go back to the story. And what happens at the beginning of chapter 24?
Make an altar of the earth for me.
Okay, we're doing an altar again in verse 24, chapter 24, and same kind of deals with the being careful as you approach. What do the people say in response to what Moses tells them? How do the people respond to Moses' words? Okay, they're going to do. So what's being emphasized? We've got them saying this, and then we got law, and then we got it jumping back in the story. And Moses says, and the people say what? We're going to do what you tell us to do, right? And so what does Moses do?
Wrote down what the Lord has said.
Okay, starts writing down what the Lord says. What else does he do? Okay, he builds an altar. What do you do on an altar?
You sacrifice.
You sacrifice, and when you start sacrificing, what do you got in abundance?
Blood.
You got blood.
Oh.
Now, I want you to visualize when they were sacrificing in the Jewish temple, it was a
Bloody mess.
bloody mess. It was a bloody mess. And just imagine the smell and the flies. It was a mess. But blood is life, and that's what you're sacrificing. In fact, what does he do with this blood that he's coming from the sacrifice?
Sprinkle it on the altar.
Okay, sprinkles it on the altar because the blood of the animal sacrifice sprinkles it. What does that do to the altar? Purifies the altar. Now, what does Moses do? He reads to them, right? And the people say, we're going to be obedient, right? And what does Moses do to purify the people? Which I'm sure the people were happy about it. Sprinkles the blood, right? Onto the people. That's one of the reasons why, if you go to a Roman Catholic or an Eastern Orthodox church, they are doing the same thing with water. The same
That's why the
thing is
priest
being
is down
done.
into the-
Same thing.
Oh,
That's what the
darn.
priest is doing. Same thing. Not doing it with blood,
Oh, yeah, thank goodness.
but doing it with water as a way to consecrate the people around. Okay, so all of this, a lot of Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics are going to be grounded in the Old Testament law. They're going to take the images and use it. All right, what happens in verse 9? Something relatively important happens in verse 9. Now they're all still by this mountain, right? They're still there at this mountain. What happens in verse 9?
Are we on 21?
We're still we're in 24.
No wonder I couldn't find it.
Yeah. What's going on in verse 9?
Men went and they saw God.
They go up and they see God, right? Not only do they see God, but they do something else with God. What else do they do? They eat. So it's this image of a banquet. So we've got God being connected closely to the people. What does the Lord say to Moses in verse 12? Still in 24. What does he say in verse 12?
Come up on the mountain.
Okay, now you're going to go up the mountain again. And what is Moses going to get when he gets up on the mountain?
Stone tablets.
He's going to get stone tablets. And what's going to be on those stone tablets?
Ten Commandments.
Okay, you're going to have instructions. You're going to have, in fact, the whole covenant's going to be on these tablets. Why stone?
They last.
Well, they're durable. Yeah. Now he would have used a jump drive. Come up and I'm going to give you the divine jump drive that you just plug into your computer and it's all there.
Means forever?
Well, it does. Yeah, it does. Remember, we're talking about, and even the people who are reading it, ancient people, a lot of what they end up doing is cuneiform, is pressing into, that's how the people in Babylon, they would press letters into clay, and it would harden. They weren't writing because there was nothing to write on, because you don't have paper. So they pressed into tablets. And this is kind of what's going on here. So he's going to get tablets. So going to go up, going to get instructions, right, on stone. Who goes with Moses?
Aaron and Nabal.
Who's with Moses now? Joshua goes. So Joshua and Moses go up on the mountain of the Lord. And that's going to be important because who's been going with him? Aaron's been going with him in the past. Aaron is not going with him right now because Joshua's going with him, right? And in fact, Moses says, and again, we're talking about a story that's being written for people later. It's like the author makes sure we know what. When he says, well, Moses and Joshua are going up to the mountain, what does Moses say to the people? Think of it as sort of a literary thing. The teller of the story is making sure we know. What does he tell the people? What's that? Yes, I'm leaving these two guys. Remember these two guys that are always with me? Have always gone on the mountain with me? Aaron and Hur? I'm leaving them in charge. So they're going to take care of you while I am gone. So now we know Aaron is what?
A leader.
He's a leader down below. Moses is
A leader
on top. So he is separate. Man alive, we're being set up for something, right? Moses is gone, but Aaron has been left behind. Moses goes up on the mountain. Now, of course, what happens when Moses goes up on the mountain?
He gets the instrument.
A cloud surrounds him because we know the cloud represents the glory of God, the presence of God. So we've got this, and there's a fire on the mountain, and Moses is up on the mountain for how long?
40 days.
40 days. We've seen 40 before. When did we run across 40 before? Well, we haven't got the desert yet, but we did have
The flood.
Oh, the flood story. 40 is one of those numbers that Jews are considered sort of important, sacred numbers. And it's based on how you break 40 down. It's not a perfect number, but it can be when you break it into perfect numbers. So he's on the mountain 40 days, right? And while he's on the mountain, the redactor, the one who is shaping this story, what does he include in chapter 25? What does he write about in 25?
He wants an offering.
Yeah, you don't need to give me details. Just that now you're talking about headings. What do you see in 25?
Offerings for the tabernacle.
Offering for the tabernacle. What do you got in 26?
Not tabernacle.
Okay, tabernacle. All this stuff with the tabernacle. What's he writing about? What's all this stuff? Just in general.
Things are supposed to happen.
Yeah. These are procedures, right? And structure. What's going on in 27?
The altar and the burnt offering.
Okay, altar and he's giving instructions on altar and burnt offerings. 28.
Priestly garments.
Okay, priestly garments, what the priest is supposed to wear. 29.
Consecration of the priest.
Consecration of the priest. How do you make a person a priest? 30.
The altar of incense.
Okay, 31.
Gazelle and, I don't know how to say those names. That's what 31 does.
Okay. What do we got here? What do we have in those chapters? Why are we not looking at them in detail?
They're ones that are laid out.
It's laid out. This is how I want you to do things that we don't do
All the time.
ever.
Oh, ever, okay.
We don't do ever because we are never building an altar. And we are never consecrating priests. And we're never identifying certain things that they are supposed to wear. You know, we don't do that. These are laws given, right? So, since it's part of this narrative, what is the writer doing? Why is the writer giving a little bit of narrative and then a whole bunch of laws, and then a little bit of narrative and then a whole bunch more laws? What is the writer doing? What do you think the writer's doing? And I'll tell you, the redactor's doing. He keeps on doing it. He's going to do it all the way through Numbers. What is it? What do you think he's trying to do as he's telling this story to people living later?
He's setting it up.
Okay, he's setting it up. He's grounding all these laws into something that is narrative, a narrative history. He's giving all these laws divine sanctity. This is coming from God, and it's part of their story. It's part of their story. So he's not telling the story and then putting the law later. He's integrating these laws into the story itself. Even though when you look at these, they don't necessarily belong here. I mean, they don't have anything to do right now with Moses being up on the mountain and Aaron being down below. It really doesn't. Only that Aaron is going to be the priest, so you got that kind of stuff. But there's no real connection between that, except that the writer's integrating these laws into the history, into the story of the people. So we've got all these chapters of laws that we're not going to look at because it is really boring. You know, it is really dull looking at it. Wait until you get to Leviticus. Lord have mercy. It is really dull because there's no narrative there. It's just a whole bunch of laws. Once the situation, after we finish all of that, we're back to the narrative in chapter 32, right? So we got all these laws and we're back to a narrative in 32.
The golden calf.
Okay, now we got this at the beginning of 32. Moses is on this mountain for 40 days. The writer is suggesting he's receiving all this stuff, these laws, up on the mountain for 40 days. The people down below, let's get back to the story.
They're restless.
Melting down all their
Well,
jewelry.
even before they melt down the stuff, what's the issue in verse 1 of 32?
They're restless.
They haven't seen Moses.
They haven't seen Moses for 40
Yeah.
days. You know, they didn't know. He just went up on the mountain. He's been delayed. So what do?
Come make gods.
Okay, they go to the guy who is now in charge, right? And that's Aaron. And what do they want from Aaron? We need
To make us gods.
We need to make it. And that's what he says, making gods. Now, what are they really asking him to do? Because we see it later. What do they want him to do? Are they talking about creating a new god? Not really. What are they asking him for?
Permission.
Well, they're asking permission. I think even a little more than that. What do they want Aaron to
Make
do
them
for him? Because remember, Moses has been on that mountain for a long time, been separated, right?
He wants to make us gods.
They want Aaron to make them gods. Now, are we talking about they're going to create a whole bunch of new gods? No. What does he want him to do? What do they want him to do? That when you look at it this way, kind of makes sense. Moses has been on the mountain a long time. What do they just want Aaron to do?
Connect them to God.
What's that?
Connect them.
That's it. They want a connection to God. They want something tangible that will connect them to God. That's what they want. You know, Moses is up on that mountain. And there's a cloud up there. Aaron, you got to give me something tangible. You got to give us something tangible. Because we're standing here in the middle of the desert eating manna and quail. And we don't know that he's going to come back. Give us something tangible. Give us a tangible representation of God. Give us a tangible representation of God.
But Aaron knows better.
Well, why would they? Yeah, we'll get there in just a minute. Because God said to them, remember, back away is don't do this specifically. Why might a people want that? This tangible representation of God.
Because they don't have enough faith.
Well, they don't have faith.
if they can't see it,
Do we do that?
can't see it, you don't always believe it.
Well, that's right. So, you know, when I was in the church in Montana, and I think one of the things, well, we even step back, one of the things that Reformed Christians, and that's what we are, we're kind of Calvinist Reformation, that kind of jam. If you look at like the confessions, the history of the church, have always been very uncomfortable with things like altars. Really uncomfortable with altars. Really uncomfortable with pictures. A lot of pictures of Jesus. When I was in this church in Montana, we decided in the sanctuary, but I'm not an idiot about certain things you don't say, although I said more than I should have when I was young and stupid. When you went into the sanctuary on the back wall, high above, because it was opening, back wall high, was a picture of Jesus. You know, the picture of Jesus holding a sheep. You know, staff holding a sheep. Great big, huge, big, enormous back there. Well, the church decided to put in new speakers for the organ that looked like pipes. It looked like pipes. I don't, you know, I thought it was a great thing then, I'm not sure, but it looked like pipes. And we're going to put them back there, which meant the picture had to be
Taken down.
taken down. Now, I remember it as clearly as I'm sitting here, session meeting. What are we going to do with this picture? First, when we took it down, found out it really wasn't, it wasn't an expensive print. In fact, it didn't really fit in the frame. There was space on the top but you didn't notice it when it was way up high. But when you took it down, it was, you know, cardboard printed. It wasn't painted or anything. Took it down, and I remember clearly sitting in a session meeting, and Doris, I don't remember her last name, but Doris saying, you know what we should do? We should put that picture down floor level. So when you come in the sanctuary, that's the first thing, because you came from the side. First thing you see is a picture of Jesus. And when you see that picture of Jesus, you'll hear the phone ring. Because God will want to talk to you. Right? As soon as you see that picture of Jesus. She said, that's not different than when that spam
That's
called
me.
when we were in the office. Okay. It didn't say God, did it?
No.
Okay.
It said my daughter in the hospital.
Because if it said God, you probably should have taken it. But she said, let's take it down, put it, so as soon as people walk in, they see the picture of Jesus. And when they see it, they'll get quiet.
No.
Wow. That picture of Jesus was going to have power, right? It would calm people down. It would help them focus on God. Wow. Whoa, whoa, whoa. All of a sudden, man, we got stuff going on all over the place. But that's what they wanted. You know, like I said, she evidently really needs you. So that's good. We do that too. We do it with images. We do it with the Bible. You know that the Bible we treat it different because it's the Bible. You know, we don't treat it the same way because it's the Bible. It's not just a book; it's a Bible book, which means the book is holy, even though it was produced at a factory, probably in China, and shipped here. But it's holy. You know, that's what we do. Because we need tangible representations of God. It's hard to worship a God that you can't see. So we create tangible. Sometimes we do it with...
Good intentions.
Yes, absolutely good intentions. And frankly here, we don't know their intentions. And their intentions may be good. Maybe nothing wrong with their intentions. Sometimes we do it with people. You know, we'll kind of worship certain people and put them higher than others. You know, okay, But that's a little dangerous, right? Because we've created something. Paul will say that's the problem with the Jews. That why the Jews are committing idolatry. Because they've decided to worship the law. They view the law as the representation of God there. They don't follow it. But they believe they're special because they got it. Which means it's just another idol. So anyway, that's what these people want. Easy to judge them and say, oh, we'd never do it. But we do it. We do it. I do it. Because we like to have something that we can touch, something that's physical, something we can see. All right, so that's what they go to Aaron and say, we're scared. Moses is gone. We're scared. We need something we can look at and say, that reminds us of God. That reminds us of God. A steeple on top of a church. That tells me it's a church, right? What does Aaron do?
Goes along with them.
He goes along with them and in fact gives them direction. What does he say? Because Aaron doesn't say, well, I don't want to have anything. You do what you want. I don't want anything. What does Aaron do?
Tell them to take off the gold.
Okay, take off your gold jewelry and give it to me. And what does he do?
Melts it down.
He melts it down and and it's really detailed here, right? He melts it down and what does he do with it?
Made it into
He
asset
makes it
shape.
into a calf. Now, probably it was a male calf because it's probably a bull. Because bulls become really important ancient symbols, representations of God. Because bulls represent strength, power, fertility. Bulls are good. This is what ancient people see, especially herders. Because bulls, you want bulls because you have large flocks when you have bulls. So it's probably a bull. Israel, where after the kingdoms divide, Israel will set up bulls as representations of their gods. They're going to do it at Bethel once the temple is gone. They don't have access to the temple. But I want you to notice the author says Aaron molded the bull, the calf, right? He molded it himself. So something he's making with his own hands, right? And he's got this calf, and what does Aaron, of course, build in front of the calf? He builds an altar, so they're going to do some sacrificing, and what are they going to do? Well, they sacrifice, they're going to have a festival. And we look at it and say, oh, well, that's horrible. They're worshiping, false. They may be doing this as a way to worship the Lord God. This is their way to see the Lord God. The trouble is, they're doing what the Lord God said, don't do. He said, don't do it, and they are doing it. And what happens? Moses is up on the mountain. What happens?
Well, they have a feast and it turns into an orgy.
Well, they're having a party. They're having a party. That's they're having a party. And what does the Lord say to Moses?
He told him to go down and take care of his people.
Yeah, you got a mess. They've made themselves a calf, and they're worshiping and sacrificing. Now, what does God plan to do? We are going to destroy. I'm going to destroy the people. What now? You say, "Oh golly, God's going to destroy the people." That's terrible. That's a terrible thing. Why would this be justified in what we've established in Exodus?
He disobeyed him.
There's a covenant, right? Mm-hmm. The covenant is, I do this,
you obey.
You do this, and what I want is obedience. And the writer. The redactor has made it really clear when he said, the Lord said, don't do this, and that's exactly what they've done. The covenant was broken. What does, and in fact, the Lord says, I'm going to kill these people. What am I going to do for you, Moses?
Make you a great nation.
I'm going to make you the father I'm going to make a new covenant with you. And what does Moses say?
Pleaded with God.
Which becomes really interesting. This conversation between the Lord and Moses. Well, of course, nobody's here writing it down. I mean, it's not like you got a reporter hiding behind a rock writing this conversation down. So this is something the teller of the story is giving to people later. And what does Moses say to the Lord?
Do not destroy your people.
Okay, don't destroy. And what does Moses tell God is the reason he shouldn't do it? Moses doesn't say, don't do it because that would make you a meanie. Or don't do it because that would be nasty. Or don't do it because I don't want to be the father of a nation. That's too much pressure. Why does he say you shouldn't do this?
Because he brought the people out of Israel to make nations.
Okay, you brought them out of Israel. What else does he say? You did this thing with
I think you brought them out to kill them.
You didn't bring them out to kill them. What does he say is behind that whole thing? What does he remind the Lord of? And the writer of the story is reminding people who are reading it much later. What does Moses refer as he's talking
Abraham.
about? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He reminds God of the covenant he made with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and even reminds them, the Lord, of the terms. Now, has the Lord forgotten this? Well, no. Why then does the writer have this little conversation that nobody could have heard but Moses? Why does he have this? What is he doing for people who are living much later?
So to understand what's going on.
Okay, to understand what's going on here in a historical sense maybe, but in a broader sense, why does that become important to people who are living much, much later? What does this little exchange between God and Moses do for people who are 1,000 years after Moses?
God changed his mind.
Because God did what?
Relented.
He remembered the covenant he made. Even though the people screwed up and they broke the covenant, God chose to do what?
Relent.
Show mercy and compassion. Mercy and compassion. He showed, and that's something Paul picks out. That's what Paul likes. He's showing mercy and compassion. And that becomes a good reason to have this in here, because you're writing to people who have screwed up over and over and over again. And he's writing to people right now, us in this room, who do what?
Let's send over.
Who screw up. Come here. Who screw up over and over and over again. Okay. Now, doesn't mean they don't pay the consequences, right? Okay. But God doesn't destroy the people. What happens with Moses?
He took the tablets down.
He's got these 2 tablets engraved by God himself, right? And as he's heading, what does Joshua think? Which is kind of interesting. Which, when you think about it, kind of gives us insight into what Joshua will be later.
He heard the shouting of the people and thought there was war.
Yeah, assumes that somebody has attacked the camp, right? That there's a battle going on. And what does Moses say?
Sounds like singing.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like they're fighting to me, you know. It sounds like something else, like they're having a party. And when they get close to the camp, what do they see?
Dancing.
What does Moses see?
Calf.
He sees a calf and he sees people dancing, which to me, and I have told my wife this many, many times, dancing by its nature is evil.
Because you don't dance, huh?
I don't dance. Dancing by its very nature
Don't listen to him.
is evil. Yeah. The Lord told me that. I'll have to pray about that comment later. You know, so now what happens as he's bless you, my son. What happens, which becomes a powerful symbolic act.
He was angry. Through
He's
the tablets.
angry, and what
Through
happens?
the tablets.
Yeah.
The tablet and breaks. Symbolically, what's happened?
Breaking the covenant.
The covenant's broken. This covenant's broken. And when the writer is very clear when Moses gets down to camp, how does he describe what the people are doing?
Well, I don't know, he burned the calf and ground it.
Well,
I can't.
they're running wild. The people are running wild. Not unlike some parts of Sligo on a Saturday night. They're, you know.
I don't know, I thought they folded up the streets at 7
Well, I can tell you, I've been out, and there are some.
After curfew?
Well, I'm working on a sermon.
Oh.
You know, there's some stuff going on in houses. There's a lot of sound coming out of houses and some lights, and a lot of cars. So, and I think I've seen a golden calf before.
Well, Marcy, it must be on.
It's a happening place. Okay, so the people are going crazy, right? And they're going to want. And Moses says to them what?
Well, he said to Aaron, what these people do to him.
What's that?
He said to Aaron, what did the people do to him?
Well, even what does he say? Let's see. Yes, he says to Aaron, what's happened? Why is this happening? And what does Aaron say? And I love this.
Do not be angry, my Lord.
Yeah, don't be angry. And how does he describe what happened?
People are prone to these evils.
You know, the people wanted to do it. I thought it was a bad idea. You know, I thought it was a bad idea. People are prone to evil. Yeah, I think it was a bad idea. But so I collected all the gold, and what did I do with it? I threw the gold into the fire. And then what happened? Out came the calf. Now, because the writer has told us, what did the writer tell us about Aaron? He molded the calf.
Yeah.
You know, the writer went out of his way to tell us he molded the calf, and now Aaron is saying
It wasn't his fault.
he threw it in the fire and out it jumped. Wow, that's pretty.
You had the mold in it.
And then it.
You threw the mold in the mold. It molded.
Yeah, that's now. You know, it's kind of interesting, and we've seen this before. Aaron is going to be the father of every priest of Israel. And yet we're getting an impression of Aaron that is...
Not so good.
No.
He's not a good person.
He's not so... Well, he's a liar. Not only can we say he was weak and for whatever reason,
Not
you
a
know,
leader.
he was not much of a leader, and he's a liar, you know. And he's a priest. Again, why would the writer want to portray the father of all priests as not great?
Because he's mortal.
Because he's mortal. And the focus is not on the priest, it's on the guy that's represented by the priest. Okay, so the people are running wild, right? And Aaron is, you know, he's full of it. He just is. And what does Moses say to the people? They're running crazy. You know, they're running wild. What does Moses say to the people?
The goers of the Lord come to me.
Come over to my side. And who comes?
All the Levites.
Okay, all the Levites come over to his side. Now, we haven't had a great impression of Levites, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what's a little history of the Levites? Yes. What have we gotten from the Levites? Remember the story and what got the Levites in trouble? What was their claim to fame in Genesis?
You know the ones that killed
Shechem. Yeah, with Dinah, the sister. The Levites came and took care of business. Once they said had Shechem and the family circumcised and they were kind of down, the Levites came in, and Levi and Simeon came in and took care of business. And so remember when Jacob was blessing the sons, Levi was told, you're not going to get a part of the land, because of your violence. Well, now the Levites step forward. So, and that's it. Now the Levites step forward. Now, why does that become significant? He says, who is on the Lord's side? And they step forward. What is that now establishing about Levites?
That they believe in God.
Okay, that they serve God. Now, why is that going to be important 1,000 years later? Because the Levites are the ones that work in the temple. So we're establishing, Daddy, why do we call them Levites that work at the temple? Well, son, let me tell you about it. It's about Moses. Here comes, the Levites. And what do the Levites do? Because they got a history of being kind of violent. Yeah, he sets them loose, right? And what do the Levites end up doing?
Killing people.
They end up killing a bunch, right?
Yeah.
How many people end up dying here? Okay, 3,000 end up being slaughtered, and that wasn't even good enough, because what happens to the people after? What does the Lord do?
Take their names out of his book.
Takes the names out of the book, sends a plague. This is not going to be good. Now,
They're killing their own people?
yes,
Yes.
they're killing their own people. Yeah. Why are they doing that? Why are they killing their own people?
Because they disobeyed.
What lesson could we conceivably take from the Levites slaughtering 3,000 people? And this isn't going to be the first time. We got more people dying. Numbers you got people dying all over the place in Numbers. What is this now? Think in terms, not in terms of what's happening here as some kind of historical sense, but think of it as a story that's being given later. Well, it's repeating. People are continuing to fail, which is an important lesson, that even when people seem to have been taught a lesson, they continue to screw up.
Yeah.
What else does it teach?
Compassion and mercy.
Well, maybe that God doesn't wipe them all out.
Yeah.
But behavior has consequences. Behavior has consequences. Now, if we read this as a purely historical story, man, we should have problems with this. I mean, killing 3,000 people, I got a problem with that. Man, I got a problem with a lot of stuff that's happened in Numbers, because God's killing thousands of people right and left in Numbers. If I look at it as a story that has a meaning later, a meaning that I can claim,
What goes around comes around, because they killed others and now they have to kill their own.
behavior has consequences. And if you run around worshiping, doing what I told you not to do, that has consequences. It just does. Now, it may not be, hopefully it's not that you're dead, but it has consequences. It just plain does. And I think that's going to be the lesson we hear over and over again. God's made a covenant with his people, covenant that rests on obedience. And when you don't obey,
You pay.
it has consequences. It just does. And I think we get that, and we're going to get that throughout Numbers. Once the law, because when we're in Numbers, the law is pretty much developed. Now, again, as we read it in the 20th century and we project it on history, this is very uncomfortable, and it should be. But if we look at it as a story that's teaching a lesson to people later, man, this is something we may need to pay attention to. We may not be killed by a Levite when you're mean, Barb, because you're on steroids. Don't worry about answering the door. A Levite is not going to be there with a sword. But behavior has consequences. And I think we all know that. And what the writer has the courage to ground it in this holy story about God and about God, not even about God and his people, about God. You know, that's the world in which we live. And we're going to see that reflected in the history of Israel. You know, they're going to fall, and the writers later are going to say they fell because they were disobedient. They fell because they didn't take these commands seriously. They'll fall because they worshipped other gods. You know, this is going to be the reason, you know. So, anyway, the Levites do it. Also establish the Levites as the people who are going to be serving God. That's going to be important in Leviticus, because Leviticus is all about Levites and what Levites can carry and move the temple and all. And in spite of that, again, in 33, and this is really important, what does the Lord tell them to do?
To leave that place.
Okay, we're going to leave this place because Moses has received the law. And what is God going to do? What's the Lord going to do?
Go to the land he promised.
I am still going to lead you to the land that, not only am I going to lead you there, but what's going to happen when you get there?
I would give it to your descendants.
Yeah, I'm going to push the other people out, and I'm going to give you this land for your descendants. Okay. And the people react, but I'm not going to lead you anymore. Who's going to lead you? An angel's going to lead you. An angel's going to lead you. Remember, it was a pillar of fire that was leading before. What does Moses do? So the people, and how do they react? How do the people react to this good news?
They strip off all the ornaments.
Okay, they strip off their ornaments and they say, thank you for not killing us. You know, in essence, we're gonna take this more seriously. So we're not going to be wearing ornaments anymore. We're going to be obedient. And what does Moses set up outside of the camp?
Tent.
Sets up a tent, and what's that tent going to be?
For the meeting. Tent.
Okay, that's where he's going to meet with the people. So as we look at this, what's happened here? What is the lesson? What is the redactor, the writer? What is he wanting to convey to people who are living way, way after these events, but who know this stuff, or know sort of in an outline, know the law comes. What is he trying to tell them, tell us?
Basically, if you don't.
They gotta live by the law.
Okay,
Yeah.
you've got a law you need to live whether God values obedience. God values obedience. Okay, and principles that we can be guided by too. Okay, any questions? Okay, next time we're going to look at, and you got to write this down, we're going to be looking at Exodus 33:9, because again, we're going to have a whole bunch of law in there. 33:9, although we're picking up where we stopped, through, yes, 34:35. Then we're going to look at 40:1 through 38, and then we're going into Numbers, 10:11 through 36.
40, what did you say
Now,
about
this
40?
will be in the bulletin, so you
Oh,
can find
okay.
this in the bulletin.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, it's good you put it in a bulletin.
absolutely, absolutely.
I missed one week and then I found my bulletin.
There you go. And then you got it, because
Yeah,
you can
you're
find
lost.
it any time, because it's in there for the whole schmear.
Yeah.
So you only need one of them.
Right.
And I think it's online. You can find it
Yeah.
online
You were-
in several places. Okay. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for guiding us through this. Remind us that you are a loving God. You put up with so much from us. Lord God, you don't let us go. But also remind us that we pay consequences. And because we pay consequences doesn't mean that you've separated yourself from us. It's just that there's justice within you. And therefore help us to obey your word and your intention. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Now, I will say one thing before we go, because the obedience is a big deal here, right? Obedience is a big deal, and we are expected to obey, right? When Jesus was teaching in the Gospel of Mark and in the Gospel of Matthew, and the person says, tell me about what the law requires. What's the greatest law of all? What did Jesus say? Love God, love neighbor, and he then takes it, Paul does the same thing in Romans 12, takes it a step further, and he says the entire law can be reduced to those two commands, the entire law. So when we talk about obedience, we can sit down and go through the whole Old Testament law and say, oh, are we doing this or are we not? Jesus says the entire law can be reduced to two commands. Love God, love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor.
And that's it. That's the law. And so if that's what we're obeying, we're really doing what God has called us to do. That's what Jesus says, that's what Paul says. So I think we should believe him. Okay, so before you go, I wanted to, Jesus kind of redefines this obedience stuff and this law stuff. So, okay. Go home, have fun, live.